The first sound wasn't the shattering of glass or a panicked scream. It was the sudden, oppressive vacuum of silence. A silence so absolute and unnatural that it seemed to physically suck the air from the opulent dining room of Aurelia, the kind of profound quiet that precedes either a miracle or a massacre. For Jameson Blackwood, a man who had built a global empire by anticipating chaos and systematically dismantling it, this silence was the loudest, most terrifying alarm he had ever heard. He sat at table 32, a purgatorial two-top, wedged between the percussive swing of a kitchen door and the monotonous hum of a sub-zero wine fridge. It was the restaurant's leper colony, a table reserved for walk-ins, tourists, and people the hostess deemed unworthy of the main floor's velvet-draped, chandelier-lit grandeur. It was, for his purposes, the perfect vantage point. His disguise, if one could call it that, was a uniform of deliberate neglect, a worn corduroy jacket whose elbows were thinning to a soft sheen, a pair of scuffed Red Wing boots that had seen more real construction sites than fashion shoots, and a 3-day-old stubble that softened the hard, calculating lines of his jaw. This ensemble had earned him the hostess's iciest glare, a dismissive flick of her eyes that started at his frayed cuffs and ended at his calloused, unmanicured hands. Her silent, swift calculation of his net worth was off by a factor of several billion. He didn't mind. Anonymity, he had learned, was a luxury far more valuable than the $500 Wagyu ribeye currently sitting, perfectly medium rare, on his Limoges porcelain plate. He came to places like this not for the food, which he could have prepared by a personal chef in his penthouse, but for the truth. It was a ritual, a penance almost, that he had started after Eleanor died. His late wife had been his anchor to the real world. She could find the humanity in a corporate shark and the poetry in a subway busker. After a long, brutal battle with an illness that all the money in the world couldn't cure, his world had become sterile, a series of boardrooms and encrypted data streams. Coming to these places, dressed as a ghost of his former pre-wealth self, was his clumsy attempt to feel the pulse of the world she had loved, a world he now only observed through bulletproof glass. Then the silence broke, shattered by 4 words spoken in a voice ragged with cheap adrenaline and desperation. "Nobody move. Phone's down." Jameson's blood ran cold, a physiological response so alien he momentarily forgot how to breathe. His hand, which had been reaching for his glass of 98 Waitress, froze, mid-air. He was a man who dealt in risk on a global scale: currency fluctuations, hostile takeovers, geopolitical instability. But the raw, unpredictable terror of a common street robbery was a variable his models had never accounted for. His gaze, sharp and analytical even in shock, swept the room. Diners, who moments ago were a symphony of clinking silver and murmured secrets, were now a gallery of frozen, horrified statues. The diamonds on their necks and wrists seemed to dim, as if recoiling from the profane intrusion. Two men stood by the grand mahogany entrance, their forms made monstrous by cheap Halloween masks and baggy black hoodies. One, the taller of the two, wielded a heavy crowbar, gripping it like a cudgel. The other, shorter and twitchier, held a matte black handgun. It looked terrifyingly real, its snub nose a black hole threatening to swallow the room's gilded reality. Jameson catalogued their movements, their posture. The gun was a live wire, his weapon trembling, his stance unsteady. The man with the crowbar was calmer, his movements more deliberate. He was the leader. Gun, the volatile muscle. Panic began to bubble, a low, keening whimper from a woman at a nearby table, dripping in Chanel. But it was the reaction, or non-reaction, of his waitress that truly arrested Jameson's attention. Her name was Ilara. He knew this because her name tag was pinned slightly crookedly on the lapel of her crisp white uniform, and because she had introduced herself with a smile that was tired around the edges, but reached her deep, intelligent eyes. She couldn't have been more than 25, yet those eyes held a weary resilience he recognized from the faces of third-generation steelworkers and deep-sea fishermen, people who understood the relentless gravity of the world. While others fumbled with their phones or dissolved into silent, shuddering tears, Ilara did something extraordinary. She did nothing. She stood perfectly still between two tables, a water pitcher in one hand, her posture straight, her chin level. Her eyes, however, were a storm of silent activity. They weren't wide with terror, but narrowed in sharp, analytical focus. She was scanning, assessing, processing. Jameson, a master at reading tells in a high-stakes negotiation, watched her read the entire room in seconds. She noted the shaky hand of the gunman, a sign of inexperience. She saw how Crowbar's masked gaze kept flicking towards the back office, betraying their true target. She registered the terror of the patrons, the incompetence of the manager, Finch, who was already trying to hide behind a large, floral arrangement. She was reading the situation, not as a victim, but as a battlefield commander. "On the floor! Everybody! On the goddamn floor now!" Gunn barked, his voice cracking on the last word, betraying his own fear. A wave of undignified movement followed as patrons and staff dropped, a messy, chaotic heap of couture and terror. Jameson, his own heart hammering against his ribs in a primal rhythm, moved to comply. His mind, a finely tuned machine for risk assessment, was already running scenarios. The steak knife on his table, too close, too risky. The heavy wine bottle, a clumsy, ineffective projectile. All foolish, cinematic fantasies that would get him and others killed. He was a builder, an architect of systems, not a brawler. His power was in his intellect, his wealth, the global network he could command with a single word. Here, on the cold marble floor of Aurelia, he was as powerless as the trembling busboy huddled under a dessert cart. As he lowered himself, his eyes met Ilara's. She was helping an elderly man whose hands trembled so violently he could barely stand, ease himself to the ground. Her touch was gentle but firm, her voice a low, soothing murmur only he could hear. For a fleeting, incandescent second, her gaze locked with Jameson's. There was no plea for help in her eyes. There was no shared terror. It was a silent, steely command that shot across the room like a laser. Stay calm. Do not escalate. Be invisible. It was a look of such profound, unexpected competence, of such absolute control in the face of chaos, that it struck Jameson with the force of a physical blow. Crowbar began his sweep of the room, his cheap sneakers scuffing the polished floor. "Wallets, watches, anything shiny," he snarled, his voice muffled and distorted by the plastic mask. He loomed over the elderly man Ilara had just helped. "Come on, Grandpa, the Rolex," he demanded, nudging the man's frail shoulder with the toe of his boot. The old man flinched, clutching his wrist protectively. Before Jameson could even process a reaction, before the hot surge of protective anger could translate into a foolish action, Ilara spoke. Her voice was shockingly level, a clear, calm note in a symphony of fear. "Leave him be." The entire room seemed to hold its collective breath. The only sound was the hum of the wine fridge. Crowbar, who had been reaching for the old man's wrist, froze. He straightened up slowly and turned his head, the grotesque mask fixing its empty eye holes on her. "What did you say to me, little girl?" "His wife gave him that watch," Ilara continued, her voice gaining a quiet, resonant strength that cut through the tension. "It was a 40th anniversary gift, right before she passed. The clasp is broken, and it's engraved. It's worthless to you." She was lying, her words flowing with the smooth, unblinking confidence of a seasoned poker player. "Take mine instead. It's newer." She began to unclip a simple, silver-toned fossil watch from her slender wrist. It was a cheap, functional timepiece, probably worth less than the bottle of San Pellegrino on Jameson's table. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the act, the calm, tactical substitution of her own meager possession for a stranger's treasured heirloom, was mesmerizing. It wasn't an act of naive defiance. It was an act of masterful de-escalation. She was offering the robber a way out, a path to save face without backing down, appealing to some vestige of transactional logic over brute, unpredictable force. Crowbar hesitated, clearly thrown off balance by this disruption to the predator-prey script. He snatched her watch from her outstretched hand. "Whatever. Stupid." He then moved to Jameson, yanking the worn leather wallet from his back pocket. He grunted in disappointment at the paltry $86 in cash and the single, nondescript credit card. He didn't even glance at it. This black shard of titanium alloy with no name and no limit. The key that could unlock the treasuries of a small nation. To the robber, it was worthless plastic. The operation, however, was clearly after a bigger prize than pocket change. Gunn shoved the restaurant manager, Finch, who had been trying to merge with the shadows, towards the back office. "The safe. Open it. Now." Finch, whose earlier smarmy arrogance had dissolved into a puddle of terrified, sweaty compliance, fumbled with the combination lock, his hands shaking. Jameson watched, his mind racing. This was targeted. They knew about a safe. They knew where the office was. This wasn't a random smash and grab. As Finch finally managed to swing the heavy door open, Crowbar shoved him inside, following with a canvas bag. Gunn remained outside, a nervous sentinel, his weapon panning across the prone hostages. His eyes, visible behind the mask's slits, kept darting towards Alara. He had noticed her, too. Her composure was an anomaly, a glitch in the matrix of fear he expected to control. "You think you're smart, huh?" he spat, taking a menacing step towards where she lay on the floor. Jameson's entire body tensed, every muscle coiled, ready to spring. This was the precipice, the moment where everything could spiral into violence. A scared, insecure man with a gun and a bruised ego was the most dangerous creature on the planet. Alara didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head up to look at him, her expression unreadable. "I think you want to get what you came for and leave," she said, her voice still impossibly, infuriatingly calm. "We're all cooperating. Your friend has the money. There's no need for this to get more complicated." It was then, in that moment of extreme tension, that Jameson saw it. A tremor in her left hand, just a slight, almost imperceptible shake that she quickly stilled by pressing her palm flat against the cold marble floor. It was the only crack in her armor of serenity, a testament to the colossal, superhuman effort it took to maintain it. She wasn't fearless. She was disciplined. She was compartmentalizing her terror, locking it away in some deep, iron-walled vault within herself in service of a greater goal. Survival. Not just her own, but everyone's. From the office, there was a loud crash and a furious, muffled shout from Finch. "That's not ours. I swear to God, I don't know what that is." Crowbar emerged a moment later, his canvas bag now visibly heavier. He was stuffing not just wads of cash, but also a black, leather-bound ledger book into the bag. He gave Gunn a sharp, urgent nod. "Time to go." They backed towards the entrance, their weapons still trained on the cowering diners. "Nobody moves. Nobody calls the cops for 10 minutes, Gunn shouted, his voice high-pitched and frayed. "We mean it." And then they were gone, the shriek of their tires on the asphalt outside a final, violent exclamation point on the evening's horror. For a full, agonizing minute, The room remained a frozen tableau of shared trauma. Then, slowly, as if waking from a nightmare, people began to move. Sobs turned into gasps for air. A man helped his weeping wife to her feet. The spell was broken. Finch stumbled out of his office, his face the color of ash, already barking into his phone at the police, his voice a mixture of panic and self-importance. Jameson got to his feet, his mind a whirlwind of calculations and assessments. He wasn't thinking about the robbery anymore, or his own mortality. He was thinking about the waitress. In a world of performative courage and loud-mouthed bravado, he had just witnessed the quiet, unyielding strength of true character. He looked for Ilara and saw her not comforting herself, but kneeling beside the elderly man, who was now weeping silently into his hands, his old, precious watch still on his wrist. She was speaking to him in a low, soothing voice, her own trauma set aside completely to care for another's. Jameson Blackwood hadn't gotten to where he was by being sentimental. He was a pragmatist, a ruthless optimizer of systems. But what he had just seen wasn't a system to be optimized. It was humanity at its most raw, resilient, and noble. And the system he currently inhabited, the one that put a woman of such caliber in the worst section of a restaurant, earning minimum wage, plus the fickle generosity of strangers, was fundamentally, irrevocably broken. He walked back to his table. The half-eaten steak was cold, congealed. He pulled out a wad of bills from his money clip and placed $500 on the table, enough to cover the exorbitant check and leave a generous tip. But the gesture felt hollow, disgustingly inadequate. Throwing money at a problem was a rich man's trick, a way to buy absolution and distance from the messy, inconvenient truth of it. It solved nothing. He needed to understand. Finch was now berating the staff, his fear having quickly curdled back into his default state of petty tyranny. This is a disaster, a complete and utter disaster. You, he pointed a shaking, accusatory finger at Ilara. What were you thinking, talking to them? You could have gotten us all killed. You have any idea what our insurance premiums are going to be? This is coming out of your pay, all of you, for the disruption. The blatant, staggering injustice of the accusation was so potent, it was almost surreal. Ilara stood up, her face a mask of profound exhaustion. But she didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just stood there and absorbed it. Another blow in a life that had clearly taught her how to take them without flinching. Jameson felt a cold, clean fury rise within him, an emotion he hadn't experienced with such intensity since his early days, fighting for his first company in a Silicon Valley garage. It was a burning rage against inefficiency, injustice, and willful stupidity. Finch wasn't just a bad manager. He was a flaw in the system, a parasitic bug that needed to be isolated and purged. He approached the knot of chaos around Finch. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried an unmistakable weight of authority that had nothing to do with volume, a tone that had silenced boardrooms and made politicians tremble. Finch spun around, ready to dismiss him, but something in Jameson's cold, dark eyes made him pause. "What? Can't you see we have a major situation here?" "I was your customer at table 32, Jameson stated, his gaze flicking for a moment to Alara. "I want to commend this young woman. Her courage and her astounding clear-headedness in an impossible situation were remarkable. She may very well have prevented a greater tragedy here tonight." He then turned his piercing gaze back to Finch, and the temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Your reaction, on the other hand, is not only unprofessional, it's contemptible. Threatening your staff after a traumatic event of this magnitude is a failure of leadership, I find. Fascinating." Finch's face cycled through confusion, indignation, and finally, splotchy, apoplectic rage. "Who in the hell do you think you are?" Before Jameson could answer, the first police officers entered, and the official, procedural part of the evening began. Statements were taken. Names were written down. Jameson gave a brief, surgically precise, factual account, omitting his own internal analysis. When the officer asked for his name and occupation, he simply said, "James Archer, consultant." An alias, but one linked to a real, if minimalist, identity he maintained for just these occasions. As the commotion swirled, Jameson found a moment to speak to Alara alone. She was standing by the service station, her hands now shaking uncontrollably as the adrenaline finally wore off, betraying the terror she had so masterfully suppressed. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now. She jumped, startled out of her reverie. "Oh, yes. Thank you. I'm okay." Her eyes were glossy with unshed tears, the dam of her composure finally beginning to crack. "What you did," he said, his voice imbued with a sincerity that was impossible to fake. "For that man, for all of us, it was extraordinary." A flicker of something pride, maybe, or just sheer surprise, crossed her face before it was replaced by a weary resignation. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Jameson said, his voice firm, absolute. "They wouldn't have. I know they wouldn't have. My name is James." He extended a hand. "Alara," she replied, shaking it. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused. "Is there anything I can do for you, Alara?" he asked, and the question felt heavy, significant, a door opening. It was not a casual, polite offer. She gave him a small, sad smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Thank you, but I'll be fine. I'm just glad no one was hurt." She glanced over at the police, at Finch giving his self-aggrandizing, completely fabricated version of events. I have to get back to work. They'll probably want us to clean up soon." The sheer, soul-crushing absurdity of it, scrubbing floors and polishing silverware hours after, facing down a gun crystallized Jameson's resolve into something hard and sharp as a diamond. He watched her walk away, a solitary figure of dignity in a sea of chaos and self-pity. He knew her first name. He knew she was a hero. But he knew nothing else. And that was about to change. He left the restaurant and stepped into the cool, indifferent night air. The city hummed around him, a beast with 1,000,000 beating hearts, oblivious to the small drama that had just played out in one of its gilded cages. He pulled out his phone, a sleek, custom-built device with military-grade encryption, and made a call. A clipped, precise, British-accented voice answered on the first ring. "Wren, I need you." "Trouble, Mr. Blackwood?" the voice asked, calm and unbothered. Wren was more than the head of his personal security. He was his fixer, his spy master, the executor of his will. A man who had once disappeared a rogue agent in the middle of Moscow, he could certainly handle a corrupt restaurant manager. "I need a complete workup on a restaurant called Aurelia and its general manager, a man named Anthony Finch. Financials, suppliers, employee records, health code violations, personal vices. I want to know what he had for breakfast and who he paid for it. More importantly," Jameson paused. The image of Ilara's steady, courageous eyes burned into his mind. "I need to know everything about a waitress there. Her name is Ilara Valerio. Find her. Be discreet. I want to know what kind of life produces a woman like that." "Consider it done," Wren replied without a hint of surprise or question. "Initial intelligence summary on your desk by 0600. As Jameson slid into the back of the nondescript Audi A8 that materialized silently out of the darkness, he looked back at the warm, inviting glow of Aurelia. The police lights still flashed, painting the scene in frantic, silent strokes of red and blue. He had gone in seeking a simple meal and a fleeting connection to a world he had lost. He had left with a mission. The robbery was merely the catalyst, the spark that had illuminated a rot that ran far deeper than he could have imagined. Finch's vile behavior, Ilara's quiet heroism, they were symptoms of a larger societal disease of exploitation and invisibility. And Jameson Blackwood was a man who, when faced with a flawed system, didn't just patch it. He tore it down to the studs and rebuilt it from the foundation up. For Ilara, and for all the other invisible heroes like her, he was about to do what he did best. The story wasn't over. It had just begun. The 0600 report was on Jameson's penthouse desk before the sun had even begun its ascent. A cool, encrypted tablet waiting for him next to a steaming cup of black coffee. Its contents painted a picture that was far darker and more poignant than he had anticipated. Wren, with his typical ruthless efficiency, had divided the intelligence into two separate, hyperlinked files. Finch, Anthony, asset negative, and Valerio, Elara, asset positive. He opened Finch's file first. The man was worse than a petty tyrant. He was a methodical, digital age predator. Wren's team had slipped through the restaurant's outdated firewalls like ghosts, leaving no trace. Finch was skimming, not just from the register in some old-fashioned way, but directly from his employees' digital tips. He had exploited a loophole in the payroll software, creating a service charge redirect that siphoned a percentage of all credit card tips into a personal holding account registered to a shell LLC. It was a bloodless, digital crime that stole thousands of dollars a month from his already underpaid staff. But that was just the appetizer. The ledger book the robbers had stolen? Wren's network of informants in the city's underbelly was already chattering. It wasn't just the restaurant's books. Finch was a mid-level player in a sophisticated supply chain fraud. He was buying high-grade A5 Wagyu and wild-caught seafood from a legitimate, top-tier supplier on paper and on the menu, but supplementing a significant portion of the actual inventory with cheaper, sometimes expired or mislabeled, products from a black market distributor. He'd pocket the massive difference. It was a dangerous, disgusting game that risked public health for profit. The robbery, Wren hypothesized with 95% certainty, wasn't random. The thieves knew exactly what that ledger contained. It was likely a rival player, or someone Finch had double-crossed looking for leverage. Jameson's jaw tightened into a knot of cold steel. This was the rot. The quiet, insidious corruption that festers just beneath the surface of glamour and luxury. Then, with a sense of trepidation, he opened Elara's file. The story it told was one of quiet, heartbreaking, relentless struggle. Elara Valerio, 26 years old. Her parents, immigrants who had run a small bakery, had died in a head-on collision with a drunk driver 5 years prior. The accident had left her as the sole legal guardian of her younger brother, Liam, who was now 17. And Liam was sick. He had a rare, aggressive form of cystic fibrosis, a genetic disorder that attacked his respiratory system. The file contained a detailed summary of his medical history: constant, prohibitively expensive medications, specialized breathing treatments, and frequent, lengthy hospital stays. The resulting medical debt was a mountain, a staggering 6-figure number that made Jameson's eyes narrow. Elara was working 2 full-time jobs, the fine dining at Aurelia at night, a greasy spoon diner in the morning, a grueling 70-hour-a-week schedule just to keep her head above the churning water of debt collectors and pharmaceutical bills. Her address was a small 3rd-floor walk-up apartment in a run-down neighborhood miles from the glittering lights of Manhattan. The file included a recent photo, likely from social media. It showed her, not in her waitress uniform, but sitting by a hospital bed, reading aloud from a worn paperback to a pale but smiling teenage boy with an oxygen tube in his nose. Her face, captured in the harsh, unforgiving light of the hospital room, was etched with a love so fierce and a weariness so profound it made Jameson's chest physically ache. This was it. This was the source of her impossible strength. This was why she had faced a gun with such methodical calm. Her daily fears were already occupied by something far more terrifying and relentless than a man in a mask. She wasn't just fighting for her life in that restaurant. She was fighting for her brother's life every single minute of every single day. Finch's wage theft wasn't just a financial injustice. It was a direct, mortal assault on a young boy's future. The cold fury returned, but now it was sharper, more focused, honed to a razor's edge. Jameson's plan began to form, not a blunt instrument of revenge, but a complex, multi-pronged strategy of surgical destruction and creative reconstruction. He would not just help Ilara. He would empower her. He would not just fire Finch. He would utterly dismantle him, legally and financially, leaving nothing but dust. The first step was to establish contact, to verify the intel from the ground. He couldn't approach her as Jameson Blackwood, the billionaire. That would create a power dynamic of charity he despised. He needed to be James Archer, the concerned consultant from Table 32, the stranger who had witnessed her courage. He found her the next morning at the diner. The Morning Glory. A classic greasy spoon with cracked vinyl booths and the comforting, honest smell of coffee and bacon. She looked even more tired than the night before, her movements mechanical and economical as she refilled coffee cups and took orders with a practiced, weary efficiency. He slid into a booth in her section, the cracked red vinyl sighing under his weight. When she approached, notepad in hand, and saw him, a flicker of recognition crossed her face, followed immediately by a hint of deep apprehension. "You," she said, her voice a near whisper. "Me," Jameson confirmed with a small, disarming smile. "I hope you don't mind. I was in the neighborhood. I wanted to see how you were doing after everything." "I'm fine," she said automatically, the waitress smile clicking into place like a shield. It didn't come close to reaching her eyes. "Coffee?" "Please," he said, "and a moment of your time, if you have one. It's important." She glanced around the half-empty diner, her shoulders tense. "Look, about last night. Thank you for what you said to Mr. Finch, but you shouldn't have. It's only going to make things harder for me now." "That's part of the reason I'm here," Jameson said, leaning forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Finch is a problem, and I have reason to believe he's more than just a bully. I think he's a thief." Ilara's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She took a step back, glancing over her shoulder as if Finch himself might materialize from the steam of the coffee machine. She turned back to him, her expression guarded, wary. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The tips," Jameson said quietly, directly. "The service charges on the credit card slips. Has it ever seemed to you like your take-home pay doesn't quite add up?" He saw a flash of bitter confirmation in her eyes, a flicker of a long-held suspicion she had never dared to voice. She had known. Or at least, she had suspected, along with the rest of the staff, who likely dismissed their shrinking paychecks as a mystery of corporate accounting. But what could she do? A single waitress, living paycheck to paycheck, against a vindictive manager who held her employment, her very survival, in his hands. "I can help," Jameson said, his voice imbued with quiet conviction. "But I need your confirmation. I need someone on the inside who can corroborate what I suspect." She stared at him, her mind clearly racing, trying to solve the puzzle of who he was. A cop? A private investigator? A labor board official? Or just a random customer with a dangerous hero complex? "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." "I know what I saw," he replied, his voice stripped of all artifice, leaving only raw sincerity. "I saw a person of profound integrity and immense courage. And I believe people like that deserve a fair shot. The world has enough Finches in it. It needs more people like you." It was the word integrity that seemed to finally break through her formidable defenses. It was a quality she clearly valued, a core part of her identity that had been starved of recognition in a world that only valued her ability to carry plates. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. She saw not a threat, but a potential, albeit strange and inexplicable, ally. "He has a book," she said, her voice dropping so low he had to lean in to hear her over the clatter of the diner. "Not the one the robbers took. A private one. Smaller. He keeps it in his office, in the bottom right desk drawer. It's always locked. I've seen him with it late at night. He logs things, cash payments from a supplier I've never seen before. A guy who comes in a beat-up, non-refrigerated van. It's always after these late-night deliveries." This was it. The smoking gun. The hard copy record of the black market transactions. "Can you get it?" Jameson asked, his heart rate quickening. Her face paled at the directness of the question. "He'd kill me. If I get caught, I lose my job. I lose everything." "You won't get caught," Jameson assured her, his confidence absolute, because he knew the resources he could bring to bear. "I have a team. We're very good at what we do. We can create a diversion, disable any security cameras, give you a window. All you would need to do is get the book. We'll handle everything else." He scribbled a number on a clean paper napkin. The profound irony was not lost on him, and pushed it across the Formica table. "This is a secure, encrypted, untraceable number. A burner. Text me when you know Finch will be out of his office for an extended, predictable period of time. We'll be ready." She stared at the napkin as if it were a coiled snake. It represented a choice, a terrifying, life-altering choice. She could continue to endure, to survive under Finch's oppressive thumb, hemorrhaging money and dignity day by day. Or she could take this monumental, insane risk, placing her trust in a complete stranger who spoke of justice like it was a tangible thing one could actually achieve. For a long, silent moment, she said nothing. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, her hand steady now, she picked up the napkin folded it into a tiny, neat square, and slipped it deep into her apron pocket. She didn't say yes. She didn't have to. She looked at him, her jaw set, with a new, fragile determination. "Your coffee," she said, turning to grab the pot, the waitress mask slipping back into place. The brief, intense, personal moment was over. But something profound had shifted between them. A conspiracy had been born. Jameson left the diner feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline he hadn't felt in years. This was better than any multi-billion-dollar corporate takeover. This was real. 2 days later, the text came. A single cryptic message delivered with digital precision. Friday, 8 p.m., annual Sommelier's Reserve wine tasting event. He schmoozes the VIPs on the main floor for at least an hour straight. The game was on. Friday night at Aurelia was a carefully orchestrated piece of theater. The main dining room was a sea of glittering jewels and tailored suits for the Sommelier's Reserve event. Finch was at its center, the star of his own show, gliding between tables with a bottle of ridiculously expensive Bordeaux, his false, oily smile plastered on his face as he pontificated on tannins and terroir. Meanwhile, a very different kind of performance was taking place. Jameson sat not in the restaurant, but in a black, anonymous surveillance van parked a block away. With him was Wren and a formidable tech specialist named Anya, who had turned the vehicle into a high-tech command center worthy of a spy agency. They had thermal imaging of the entire building, audio feeds from a microbug Wren had planted on a cleaning crew's cart near Finch's office, and a complete digital schematic of the building's security and network. "Elara is moving towards the back corridor," Anya reported, her eyes glued to a screen showing a heat signature layout of the restaurant, a ghostly dance of orange and yellow figures. "She's on schedule." "Is Finch still occupied?" Jameson asked, his voice tense, the collar of his shirt feeling suddenly tight. "Affirmative," Wren confirmed, monitoring a discrete audio feed through an earpiece. "He's currently engaged in a painfully detailed explanation of the 2005 vintage. We have a solid 20-minute window, possibly more. The man does love the sound of his own voice." Inside the bustling restaurant, Elara's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Every step she took towards the office felt like wading through cement. She was carrying a tray laden with empty wine glasses, her perfect excuse for being in the back corridor. She reached the office door. It was unlocked, as she knew it would be during a busy service. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she slipped inside, her movements swift and silent, and clicked the door shut behind her. The room was small, cluttered with invoices and schedules, the air thick with the smell of Finch's cloying, expensive cologne. Her eyes darted immediately to his desk, to the bottom right drawer. It was locked, just as she'd said. "She's at the desk," Anya announced in the van. "Target is locked." "All right, Elara," Jameson spoke into a small, encrypted communicator that looked like a high-end hearing aid. Now, the device I sent you. Earlier that day, a bicycle courier had delivered a small, anonymous package to Ilara's apartment. Inside was what looked like a simple, sleek key fob for a luxury car. It was, in fact, a sophisticated AI-driven lock-picking device developed in-house by Jameson's R&D division. She took it out of her pocket, her hand trembling slightly despite her resolve. She inserted the thin, metallic probe into the lock. "Press the green button," Jameson's voice coached her, calm and steady in her ear, a lifeline of composure. She pressed it. The device whirred almost silently, a sound like an insect's wings. A series of rapid, precise clicks followed, and then a soft, satisfying thunk. The drawer slid open. Her breath hitched in her throat. There it was, a small, black, leather-bound moleskin notebook. She grabbed it, tucking it into the hidden, reinforced pocket Wren's tailor had secretly sewn inside her apron earlier that week. She pushed the drawer shut, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her sternum. Suddenly, a voice came from the hallway, muffled by the door. It was another waiter, Marco. "Ilara, you in there? Finch is screaming for more Cabernet glasses for table 4. Pure, cold panic seized her. She was trapped. "Stall him," Jameson's voice said, sharp and commanding in her ear. "Wren, create a priority 1 diversion. Main floor. Now." In the van, Wren's fingers Azores flew across his keyboard. He typed a complex command string into a program that accessed the restaurant's smart building controls. A moment later, in the main dining room, the automated fire suppression system activated, but with a surgical twist. A single sprinkler head directly above the VIP wine-tasting table sputtered, then unleashed a targeted, drenching shower of water. Chaos erupted. Patrons shrieked and jumped up from their seats. Finch yelled in sputtering fury, his expensive Italian suit getting soaked. It was the perfect, localized distraction, drawing every staff member, including Marco, toward the source of the commotion. "The waiter has moved to the main floor," Anya reported, a hint of admiration in her voice. "The corridor is clear." "Ilara, move now," Jameson commanded. "Walk, don't run." She didn't hesitate. She slipped out of the office, ledger secure against her side, and merged back into the frantic motion of the staff, her face a perfect mask of bewildered, innocent concern. 10 minutes later, during her scheduled 10-minute break, she walked out the back alley door into the cool night air. A black Audi A8 with tinted windows slid to a silent stop beside her. The back door opened. Jameson was inside. "Get in," he said. She slid into the plush leather seat, her entire body trembling with the post-adrenaline crash. She pulled the ledger from her apron and handed it to him. "I got it." He took the book, his expression one of grim satisfaction. "You did it, Ilara. You were brilliant." He looked at her, truly seeing her. Not just the tired waitress, but the cool-headed, incredibly brave operative who had just pulled off a high-stakes intelligence mission without a single misstep. This is just the beginning. Now, we bring him down. Back in the sleek, minimalist war room of his penthouse, Jameson and Wren's team analyzed the ledger. The paper pages were a Rosetta Stone of Finch's crimes. And it was worse, so much worse, than they had imagined. It wasn't just about expired meat or skimming tips. Finch was a key logistical player in a massive, multi-state counterfeit pharmaceuticals ring. The black market supplier was providing near-perfect, visually indistinguishable copies of life-saving drugs to a network of unscrupulous online pharmacies and under-the-table clinics. The drugs were manufactured in illicit, unregulated labs in South America, with dosages that were wildly inconsistent and active ingredients that were sometimes inert, or worse, dangerously toxic. Finch's role was to use the restaurant's legitimate food supply chain, its refrigerated trucks and warehouse space, as a cover to move and store the temperature-sensitive counterfeit medications and to launder the cash payments through the restaurant's books. As Jameson scanned the pages, his blood turning to ice, he saw the neat columns of drug names and quantities. And then one name leaped off the page, and all the air left his lungs in a silent, horrified rush. Respira Clear Forte, batch number 7B4C. It was the exact, specialized medication Liam, Elara's brother, depended on to live. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with the sickening, final sound of a coffin lid closing. The entire, monstrous picture was suddenly, horrifyingly, clear. Elara was working herself to the bone, being systematically stolen from by a man who was simultaneously profiting from a criminal enterprise that was very likely poisoning her own brother. The injustice was so profound, so cosmically monstrous, it transcended business and became purely, intensely personal. "Wren," Jameson said, his voice dangerously quiet. All emotion bled from it, leaving only a core of cold, absolute purpose. "I don't just want Finch. I want the entire organization. I want the labs, the distributors, the crooked doctors, the shell corporations. I want to pull this thing out by the roots and burn it to the ground until not even ashes remain. Coordinate with our contacts at the FBI and the FDA. Anonymously. We'll be the ghost in the machine that feeds them the intelligence they need to burn this whole thing down." "And Elara?" Wren asked quietly. Jameson looked at the file on his desk, at the photo of her by Liam's hospital bed, her love and exhaustion, a tangible thing. "Elara is the reason we're doing this. Put a full, invisible security detail on her and her brother, effective immediately. And get a team of the best pulmonologists in the country to review Liam's case. I want every batch of his medication he's ever received tested. I want to know if he's been receiving this poison. And I want to make sure, from this moment on, he only gets the best medical care in the world. Set up a foundation, a charitable grant. She can never know it came from me. Just make it happen." The next few weeks were a blur of silent, covert activity. While Elara continued her grueling shifts at the diner and a now chaotic Aurelia, feigning ignorance with an Oscar-worthy performance, Jameson's invisible empire went to war. Wren's team fed a steady, surgically precise stream of intelligence bank records, shipping manifests, names from the ledger, GPS coordinates to a hand-picked, vetted federal task force. They tracked shipments from shell warehouses to online pharmacies. They decrypted communications. They turned Finch's entire world into a glass cage, and he never even knew it. The medical report on Liam came back. It was the best and worst news possible. He had, on at least 4 separate occasions, been given counterfeit versions of his medication, purchased from a discount online pharmacy Elara had tearfully resorted to using when her insurance had lapsed for a month. His recent, sharp decline in health was a direct result. But the damage, the doctors believed, wasn't irreversible. With the proper, consistent medication and a new experimental therapy, he could make a full recovery. Jameson immediately arranged for Liam to be transferred to a private, state-of-the-art, pediatric respiratory facility, all expenses covered indefinitely by the newly created Valerio Family Medical Grant. He had Wren arrange for the notification to come from a social worker. When Elara called the secure number he had given her, sobbing with a gratitude so pure and overwhelming it almost broke him, he simply said, "Good people deserve good things, Elara." The day of the raid was a Tuesday. Elara was working the lunch shift. Jameson was in the surveillance van again, a block away, watching it all unfold on a dozen different screens, like a conductor leading a silent, deadly orchestra. It happened just after 1 p.m. A fleet of black SUVs and unmarked sedans descended on Aurelia with silent, shocking speed. FBI agents in tactical gear swarmed the restaurant. Patrons gasped, dropping forks in midair, as agents stormed the kitchen and the back office with overwhelming force. They found Finch in his office, frantically attempting to shred documents. When he looked up and saw the half-dozen armed federal agents, his face, the same smug, sneering face that had belittled Jameson and terrorized Elara, crumpled into a mask of pathetic, sputtering disbelief. They put him in handcuffs, reading him his Miranda rights as the entire kitchen and waitstaff looked on in stunned, cathartic silence. Elara stood by the service station, a tray of water glasses in her hand, watching the man who had made her life a living hell being led away in disgrace. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions: shock, fear, vindication, and a dawning, unbelievable sense of profound relief. Her eyes scanned the street outside through the large picture windows, as if searching for someone. She was looking for the mysterious stranger from table 32, the man who called himself James. From the van, Jameson watched her. He saw the exact moment the invisible, crushing weight she had carried for so long began to lift from her shoulders. He saw her stand up a little straighter. It wasn't over. Raids were happening simultaneously across 3 states, taking down the labs, the warehouses, the entire criminal network from the top down. It would be the top story on every national news channel that night. the dramatic fall of a massive, deadly counterfeit drug ring, all thanks to a series of tips from a confidential informant. That evening, Jameson waited for Alara, not in a car, but in the quiet, sterile lobby of the medical center where Liam was now staying. When she arrived, fresh from a long day of police interviews and the chaos at the now closed restaurant, she looked exhausted, but lighter, as if a great burden had been physically lifted from her. "It was you," she said, not as a question, but as a quiet, certain statement. The foundation, the grant, the FBI, all of it. "It was you." Jameson nodded. "I had help." "Who are you?" she asked, her voice filled with a quiet awe. "Just a man who believes in fixing broken systems," he said. He handed her a thick manila folder. "This is for you." Inside, she found two things. The first was a cashier's check made out to her name. The amount was staggering, enough to cover all her past medical debts, the funeral expenses for her parents, and ensure that she and Liam would never have to worry about money again. Wren had calculated the amount Finch had stolen from the entire staff over 3 years, tripled it for damages, and made the check out to her. The second item was a business proposal. Blackwood Holdings was acquiring the parent restaurant group of Aurelia, which was now in freefall after the scandal. He was gutting the entire corrupt management structure and rebuilding the company from the top down with a new, radical focus on employee welfare. And he was creating a new C-suite position. Director of Ethical Oversight and Employee Advocacy, Alara read aloud, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What is this?" "It's a job offer," Jameson explained, his voice gentle. "I need someone to be the conscience of this new company, someone to create policies that protect employees, not exploit them, someone who understands integrity not as a buzzword on a corporate retreat poster, but as a fundamental principle to live by, someone who knows what it's like on the ground, in the trenches. I can't think of anyone in the world more qualified than you." Tears began to stream down Alara's face, but for the first time in years, they were not tears of sorrow or stress or exhaustion. They were tears of overwhelming, world-altering joy and disbelief. I don't know what to say," she stammered, looking from the folder to his face. "Say you'll think about it," he said, with a warm, genuine smile. "Go see your brother. His new doctor has some very good news for you about his long-term prognosis." She looked at him, and in that moment, he was no longer just a stranger or a mysterious benefactor. He was the ally she never knew she had, the one person in the world who had looked past her stained apron and tired smile and seen the brilliant, unbreakable hero beneath. The story, of course, didn't stay quiet for long. A determined investigative journalist, piecing together the timeline of the massive FBI bust, traced its origins back to a seemingly insignificant robbery at a high-end Manhattan restaurant. Whispers of a mysterious consultant who was present that night began to circulate. An anonymous source leaked a piece of the restaurant's internal security footage. A quiet, intense man in a worn corduroy jacket, speaking with a terrified but resolute waitress. The media machine, hungry for a hero, connected the dots with astonishing speed. The consultant was identified as the notoriously reclusive multi-billionaire Jameson Blackwood. The headline went global, exploding across the internet. Billionaire sees waitress stay calm during a robbery. What he does next goes viral. It became more than a news story. It became a phenomenon. It wasn't just about a rich man helping a poor woman. It was about competence being recognized and rewarded in a world that so often overlooks it. It was about the quiet, unyielding courage of an ordinary person, inspiring an extraordinary, systemic response. It was about a man who had the power to do anything and chose to orchestrate a quiet, brilliant revolution of justice. Jameson Blackwood never sought the publicity, but he understood its power to inspire. The story of Ilara Valerio, the waitress who became a director, became a modern-day fable, a beacon of hope in a cynical world. She accepted the position, and with Jameson's full backing, went on to revolutionize labor practices in the hospitality industry, creating systems of profit sharing, fully funded health care, and transparent management that became a gold standard for ethical business. Liam, with the best care in the world, made a full and miraculous recovery. And Jameson, from the quiet of his penthouse office overlooking the sprawling city, continued to search for flawed systems, for cracks in the world where the light wasn't getting through. He had learned a valuable, transformative lesson at table 32, a lesson his wife Eleanor had tried to teach him for years. True wealth wasn't measured in stock portfolios or quarterly earnings reports. It was measured in the lives you could change, the injustices you could right, and the silent, resilient heroes you could empower to finally, deservedly, change the world.